right, let's begin. First of all, thank you so much for coming today, and I am super excited to dive into our topic of how we can capture and create better mobile photographs. As far as my volume, how is it? Back row, you guys can hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Everything's kind of okay there? Great. Well, what I want to do is I want to start off with a quick 60-second introduction so that you have a sense of who I am and where I'm coming from, so that'll give us context. Then I want to talk about what we're going to cover in the course, and then we'll dive right in. Does that sound good? All right. Well, as a photographer, I get the chance to photograph people sometimes who are really interesting, like Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things. I also have photographed someone like Kelly Slater, a world champion surfer, or I do a lot of personal, editorial, and commercial portraiture. And that basically means someone I find interesting, I'll photograph, or I'll do magazine or client work. And I'm a family guy at heart, and this is me and my gang there, and so I do a lot of family photographs. And I don't necessarily do this as a big part of my profession, but I do it just because I love it, and I love family and kids. I also, like you, like taking pictures when I walk around, so this was just a walk in downtown LA, or this morning I went out for a run and I bring my phone with me, and I'm always searching for photographs, right? And I'm looking for those moments, like these moments that just happen to happen in front of you as you're out and about in the world. And obviously the colors and the light, and these are unedited, it's just, you're there and you capture those moments, right? And I like bringing my camera with me when I do things that I love. I'm sure like you as well, whether that's biking up in the mountains or camping in Joshua Tree. And that's a unique thing about mobile photography, at least I'm gonna guess for 99% of us, and it's this. For mobile photography, we're catching something kind of as it's happening. We're very rarely hiring a production team, renting a location, have makeup artists, hiring talent. We don't do that necessarily, but like something happens and we respond to it. And that's what we're gonna look at, how we do that. And again, for me, that means doing stuff I love or out when I'm traveling, capturing pictures. This was a trip to Italy. And so my little bit of a background is I do these things. I do photography and teaching and write books. And I've done work for companies like Google or Patagonia and have had work in, publications like Rolling Stone, New York Times. I'm a Sony ambassador, so I do a lot with that. And I've done a lot of online tutorials, over 5,000 hours, which is kind of crazy. And I also have just finished or about to launch my 7th book, which is this one. It comes out in less than a month, which I'm super excited about. All right, so that's a little bit about me. Let's dive into this topic that we're talking about today, which is really how do we capture better photographs? And the thing with photography is that it can be a bit of a maze, right? Because you think it should be sort of easy, because when you look at a photograph, it just looks simple. But then when you try to take your own, for some reason, all the elements aren't coming together. And so for us, what we tend to learn with our phones is a lesson that pro photographers have been learning for years, and it's this. And maybe some of you have experienced this if you've bought an expensive camera, and that is that you buy the really expensive camera, and then you go out and take pictures with it, and the pictures are horrible, and you realize that better gear does not always equal better photographs. Now, does better gear help? Sure. But if you think about the photographs that have been captured on phones, there are some amazing photographs that have been captured on phones that are like 4 years old, right? Like world class, that are in museums and galleries and National Geographic. Like the cameras that we have now, they're good enough. So it's not really the camera's fault anymore, it's kind of ours. And that's where the fun comes in. And what I want to look at is how we can capture and create better photographs. So there's two sides to it for me and for this talk. On the capture side, I was thinking about this and I thought, I could cover 100 topics in a really shallow way, or I could go deep into 3. So I'm going to go for the deep dive. And the deep dive for me is 1, to think like an artist, 2, to compose with proximity or closeness and story in mind, and then 3, to find or search for the light. Then on the create side, that is when we're finished after capture, how do we improve light? How do we enhance color? How do we fix and repair? And how do we also access and share these images that we've captured? Because that's one of the reasons I think why we're actually capturing them on our mobile devices. We don't tend to capture photographs and leave them there. this device wants to send them out, right? Even if it's to your brother or a friend or on social media, whatever. All right, so capture. Think like an artist. What does that mean, and how can we apply this to the craft of photography? Well, what I think this means is developing a different sensibility with your phone. So here's what tends to happen. I'll show you a lot of pictures and kind of tell stories. But you're going to have your phone, and maybe you're doing something that's, I don't know, you're checking email or looking for directions, and all of a sudden there's someone on stilts juggling, I don't know, chainsaws. And you say, oh my gosh, it gets your attention, and you push the button. But that push the button, that's a really important first step, but that's not necessarily the way an artist approaches it, right? They just see that almost as the ignition. That's where it starts. And so I want to share with you a few thoughts from a few different artists, and you may have your own, on how we might start to think more like an artist as we're using our mobile phone. Also, I should say, what tends to happen, a lot of people say to me, because I'm a pro photographer, they're like, oh, you're using your little camera. When are you going to bring out your real camera? This is a real camera if you treat it like one, right? So I give you Picasso. He said, if I don't have red, I use blue. And what I think he meant by that is I will make the most with what I have at hand. And people who are really, really good at mobile photography, they're at the beach and their kids are on a swing set and they're like, well, I'm going to make the most with this. And I don't care, it's red or blue, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to bring something to this situation. And then there's Bob Dylan, who said the purpose of art is to stop time. Now we know photography, it mechanically stops time at 1/100th of a second or something like that, right? But beyond that, the best photographs that you and I like, they give pause to the viewer, right? I mean, if you're scrolling through them, literally, they stop that person. They stop time for a moment. And a really good photograph, you actually forget about time and place. For me, or for you maybe, if you see a photograph from 20 years ago, you can almost go right back there. Like time does not exist anymore. And then there's Van Gogh. Van Gogh, let's go back to the time before he was Van Gogh. He's this aspiring artist. Impressionism doesn't exist. And he had formed a relationship with a painter who was a bit of a mentor to him. And this mentor did not like Van Gogh at all. And he didn't think what he was doing was art. And Van Gogh writes a letter to his brother about this experience. And he says that this particular painter takes it amiss that I call myself an artist, but I won't take it back. Because to me, what it means to be an artist is to be always searching, but never finding it in full. And I love that. It's not something like capital A art. Well, I'm an artist with my phone now, and I'm going to stop time. It's like I'm just searching and digging and looking, and yes, there's something exciting happening in front of me, but I'm going to keep searching and keep trying to find a way to stop time. And if there's something in the background, it's red, I'm going to try to find blue. You with me on that? And then the last thought I have for you is from Antoine Saint-Exupéry. I'm not pronouncing that right, but from The Little Prince, who said, we can only see rightly with the heart, for what is essential is invisible to the eye. And I think what good artists know and what good designers know and what good creators know is that the essential things and something that's really good, those things are intangible, right? You can see them, but you can't quite. You feel them. You with me on that? And probably when you think about your own work, you have those things or your own photographs. And so what I want us to do is start to think about how we can let other artists inform how we use this very functional, simple tool. Are you with me on that? So here's what I want to do. I used to teach college classrooms, so I'd have to keep my students awake, so I'd make them talk to their neighbor. So you're going to talk to your neighbor only twice in this talk. But this first time is, neighbor, nice to meet you. How might you use some sort of artistic influence to shape how you use your phone? It could be one of these people, or it could be I love this other artist and that they say something like this. I've never thought about applying that to working on with my phone. Does that make sense? How can you apply this concept to your own practice of photography? Let me give you an example. Let's say I choose the last one, what is essential is invisible to the heart. I might say, well, I'm going to start photographing invisible things. Rather than thinking about rule of thirds, rather than thinking about color, rather than thinking about composition, for an entire week, I'm going to photograph feeling. And I'm going to try that. And if you've probably never tried that before, it's very hard. Because you're trying to go beyond the way something looks. And how many of us, let's do one if you're a designer, two if you're a photographer, three maybe if you do film and video, and five if you just do everything. So one designer, two photographer, filmmaker, everything. Just give me a show of hands just so I know who I'm talking to as well. Okay. Some people had 2 5s, that's all. All right, so quick, introduce yourself to your neighbor. How might you apply this concept to your own work with mobile photography? You have 30 seconds. This is a real quick snap. Just say hello. All right, I'll grab your attention just so we can keep going. One of the things, hopefully that wasn't too painful. Was that too painful? Was that okay? One of the things I've noticed about the artists that I like most, they're very curious. And they're always asking questions, and they get inspiration from unlikely sources. And in this room, there's so much creative, artistic potential here. So what I'm trying to do is help us tap into that. Because you never know what someone sitting next to you might say that triggers that little thought. And so what I encourage you to do is to think about how you can do this in your own life and workflow. Let me tell you what it looks like for me. I'm on set, and Millie Bobby Brown shows up. And if you aren't familiar with her, she's an actress, and she's this really stunning person. And more importantly, my daughter is a huge fan. So I'm getting huge dad points here. And she and her friends are like, "You're photographing who?" And I'm like, "Millie, wait, how do you say her name? Millie Bobby Brown." They're like, "Oh my gosh!" So, and I'm impressed too. She's amazing. And she shows up on set, and I just react, because that's what we do with our phones. Something happens, hold the phone, take the picture. And it's not a great picture. But what I'm excited about is the light and the wind turbine and someone called action, but I'm not there. So thinking like an artist, or like, let's say Picasso, I can't change too much, red, blue, I got to make the most of this. I got to stop time. She's going to do a few more passes by this. I need to back up, and I'm shooting with my iPhone, so I'm backing up. I also want to show this light that's coming in from above, because I kind of like this BTS type thing going. And she does one pass, and it's too dark, and another one, and I'm trying to get her into the light. And then eventually, I'm obviously, because it's a demo, I'm going to show you a good image. It doesn't always work in real life like this. But eventually I get it, and she's in the right spot, right? And her her feet are separated, and her toes up like that. And I'm thinking through all of that. I'm predicting the moment that's going to happen. And so for me, and that's a close-up view and then pull back view, that's what I mean by thinking like an artist. It's not ego, it's not putting on airs, it's not putting on self-importance, but it's like something caught my eye, and then asking yourself, what is it and why? It's light, it's movement, it's motion. When you shoot like this versus like this, I saw the light up there, even though it wasn't in my picture. But the viewer didn't know that was there, right? Because if we hold up a camera, we have all this peripheral information. And so I had to say, that's actually what's interesting. Back it up, Chris. Frame that in there and then get the shot. Let's do a couple more of these. So we saw kind of this to that type of a thing. My little daughter goes out to bring toast to the chickens, and she's dressed up for some reason, and she has a book and a backpack on, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so cute. And I run out there and I take this picture, and it's just reactive. And the reactive, I don't want you to feel bad about that. I want you to feel good. That's a little spark. That's the universe kind of telling you something caught your eye, something's happening, because things that spark us are very different. So you pay attention to that. And then you arrange yourself, or you maybe arrange your subjects, and you get close. And doesn't she look like a little doll? You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, she's just so cute there. And then you get the shot. Now, here's an interesting thing. Those of you who are designers, you can show a logo halfway done, and it's beautiful. The whole work in progress thing doesn't work for photographers. Because our work, if I posted that on Instagram, work in progress, people would be like, what the heck? That's stupid, right? But you have to know that's how photography works. It's maybe similar to writers talking about their rough drafts, that they're so horrible and they trash them. And you never really believe the great writers. It can't be that bad. But it is probably. And photography is the same way, and that's okay. But artists know that. Sometimes maybe it's just a slight tweak. A friend loaned me his VW bus for a day. I was so excited. So I parked it by these palm trees, but there was cement. I just said, I like palm trees and bus, but I just need to find a new spot, right? So I just need to kind of repark the vehicle. And so again, it's like there's something there, but let me develop it further. There's something there, big bubbles in the front yard, sun kind of backlit, but there's power lines. But if I move a little bit, then I get another big bubble. And then if I get her at the right way, I can get her face in it, and I can wait for a moment. And a lot of times, shooting slow-mo video like I did here can actually teach you a lot about photography. So it's one of these hacks or these tricks. Because what photographers have a keen ability to do, like say with that Millie Bobby Brown, like how did you get it with her foot right there? I slowed it down in my mind. And that only comes from years and years of practice, right? And so you can do these little slow-mo things and try to figure out, like, well, what is a moment in a scene? And obviously, this, you know, I have still photographs of this as well. You know, I like it right when the bubble's sort of popping, like right there is my moment. You need enough bubble. Not if it's too much, then it's not interesting. Here I am at the beach. A swing set on the sand. Oh my gosh, how cool is that? I'm visiting my sister. There's my wife in the background, cousins, they're all swinging. I just respond to the picture. And artists do that, right? But then I have to kind of arrange myself and say, well, I need separation. So then I get one with my Annie kind of swinging up high, but her feet aren't above it. So then I need to get lower. And all you have to do to make people higher or taller is just drop down. And then I need to wait for that moment. And then I have to keep trying out, right? And then I'm like, well, what if I shoot into the sun? And this kind of gave me the idea, like maybe I could just isolate someone away from the beach. Maybe I don't even need the beach. Maybe it's just person swinging out into space. And so you iterate, you try, you experiment, and you're going for feeling, right? And that's what I mean by thinking like an artist. Moving to our next topic, composition. Remember I said there's two things I want to talk about with composition. Proximity or closeness, and also story. So first one, Robert Capa says if your photos aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. And I think what he meant wasn't that you need to necessarily physically be close, although that was a big part of his work and his instruction. Because these two photographs, one I'm closer, one I'm further away, I think they both work. I'll show you examples where it doesn't work to be far away as well. But I think what he really meant on a deeper level is you have to be so connected with the subject matter and that the viewer feels that closeness. If you care about what's happening, there's a greater chance someone else will care. But if you're just sort of like, okay, boom, done, it probably magic won't happen. You with me on that? So what does that look like? Walking up the steps to the house, often that means changing perspectives and physically getting closer. So there's dew on the poppies, and I just get closer, and it's iPhone, and I just get really close to the flower, and that's what makes the background go out of focus with using an iPhone. It's hard to do that because you have to be so close to things, but for flowers it works. And I just put those purple flowers in the background, and that's all we're doing, right? And so what you have to do is you have to say, when I looked at the poppies, and this happens to you, I zeroed in on a flower with dewdrops on it. I was like, wow, that's magical. And my youngest daughter, they're really into fairies, and there's like a fairy that adds dewdrops. So I'm thinking, this is like magical fairyland or something, you know. But the camera doesn't see it. The camera sees like a mess of flowers kind of stumbling over the steps. So I have to arrange myself. I have to get close to them. This is downtown LA. I saw these buildings and I was like, wow, they're kind of like coming close together. What if I stand right underneath them and just do this? And that's the shot. And all of a sudden, that shot, because of that proximity and that changed perspective, gives us a little bit more. A horse in morning, I just want to get in there and fill up his, why the long face kind of thing with that type of a shot. And so what you have to do, hopefully, is see that this isn't rocket science necessarily, right? What it is, though, is giving a little more time, thinking a little bit more about the process, because what we tend to do is this. We see something we really like, maybe even a design, like a cover of a book. We take a picture of it to remember it, but we actually then forget what it was because it disappeared in our camera roll. but we somehow magically think that because it's there, we know it more. If we really want to know a book cover, take a picture of it, sketch it, add notes about color, what is my emotional response to this? Really, you with me on that? And so we're doing that same thing with our cameras. Beautiful morning, this was a kid's field trip, what a lake, and just get closer to it and drop down and cut out that foreground. Because when you see things, you actually zoom in on it. And I could do this, you probably can't do it with me, but I can zoom in on you right there, and no one else matters right now, just you matter. But if I took a picture, everyone else would matter. You with me on that? So we have to start telling the camera how to think, how to look. Waiting to pick up my daughter for carpool, I love drops on windows. In this case, getting closer was just having the sky fill it versus the school playground or the school parking lot, and just pointing it up towards the sky, and then in Lightroom, changing the color and contrast. With these pictures we saw earlier in Italy, I want to go through the process with the one on the right. I don't have a before of the one on the left, but this was the first shot. I see this old man, see my work in progress. I can't share these, you guys, so don't tell people I took that. But I see this endearing old guy with some kind of injury. I don't speak his language. He doesn't mind. And I just take a picture, and I connect with him, and kind of get the approval. And then but I have to walk up to him, right? And you can see now we're connected, right? I did something a little bit more. I'm trying to think about this a little more artistically. Same thing while a skate park, but then arrange myself. Or chalk artist, yes, wait for a moment, but also get close, fill the frame up. Umbrella, downtown LA, fill the entire frame with that rainbow umbrella. And we can do this in lots of different ways. If you haven't tried this, look for situations. This is the ATM machine, not too far from here, about a couple miles. And they had this little sculpture, and I loved it. And if I just get in close and fill the frame with what that thing is, all of a sudden it takes on a different type of beauty. And so that's one of your assignments, is to look at filling up a frame. Because what our imagination does is when we fill a frame up, we imagine that whatever those things are go on forever and ever and ever. And it's not a weight, it's not a burden, it's kind of a simple beauty, right? But if the pattern ends, then it becomes a little bit more difficult or a little bit more problematic. Okay, well, we've talked about getting close, but we also have to talk about story, because I think the two are interconnected. We have to say, is the person kind of in front of something or maybe within? We have to say, well, what is the size of the person? What is the moment? Are we trying to capture something that has some kind of feeling? Is it a story about quiet? Is it a story about reflection? I think the picture after this was my friend's son. He was sticking his tongue out and doing this, but I just kind of instructed him, just be real still. And this is what I do with my people photography, those who know my jam. I say, close your eyes, take a breath. And whenever you take a breath, you recenter. And so in my photographs, you see a lot of stillness, and that's because I ask people to breathe. And I'm going to ask you to do that right now. Let's try it. Just take a breath collectively. Ready? We take a breath, and we feel more grounded. And what happens when I do that in groups like this, a lot of you actually smile after you breathe. And part of it's because there's a release of tension, and there's okay, I'm present, I'm here, I'm engaged. And maybe we can tell a different story. Maybe the story is about movement or motion, or I cut out the sand here of the cliff and I just have the jump. Or we can think about the scale of the subject. When you're using your mobile phone, typically you have approximately a 35 millimeter focal length lens. It varies camera to camera, but I'm just going to go with that. And what that angle of view is it's something kind of like this. Now, if I were to put on my camera a 200 millimeter focal length lens, my angle of view would be right here. So if I'm photographing a football player catching the ball, I'm using a 300 millimeter lens, so the angle of view is right on that football player. You with me on that? So I'm seeing this little teeny slice of the world. And what that means is when we have wider angle lenses, it affects how we compose and the stories that we tell. Think about popular images on Instagram. One of the formulas is small person, big world. And the reason is you already have a big world. You put a small person in there, and then all of a sudden there's mountains around them or something, and it's just wow, that's the beauty of nature, the grandeur of it. So sometimes we have to ask ourselves, maybe we want to use that, maybe we want the person to be small. I tried that, didn't work. I needed him to come forward, and things that are closer will always seem bigger and more prominent. Here's the small person in the big world, and here's a small person in the big world, and different kind of storytelling. Just so we don't think that iPhone photography is all about, I don't know, puppies and sunsets and swing sets and those kind of things. There was a huge tragedy in my town about 2 years ago. It was this debris flow, and I was there to photograph one of the relief workers who was doing a lot of work, and this was the path of the debris flow. And I took this picture, and I realized it didn't tell the story. I felt overwhelmed by being this, but I needed to integrate more. So if you look at this picture, you know, it's like a $5 million house there, and then there's my friend down below on the rocks. And you kind of get the scale that this whole wall was sort of washed away. Or I could tell a different story. Maybe he's closer to the house, and it changes the way we think of the house. Or maybe he's even taller or higher than the house, or maybe we're inside of the house. And this kind of lends itself to these stories. Isn't that kind of interesting? So the story that you want to tell, it doesn't really, I'm not saying you have to tell one kind of story, but if you just sort of point the camera at something without thinking about it, I'm sure a lot of your pictures look like this, as do mine. They just look like a lot of stuff. And the viewer's like, I don't even know what that is. Like, even this picture, it's like, I don't even know what it is. And I think I was just emotionally responding, trying to organize. And then we say, okay, yeah, put scale, proximity, angle of view, and tell that story. It's not always about closeness. As you saw, sometimes pulling away. This is my friend on a surf trip, and I'm really close to him, but I'm behind him. That didn't work, so I changed my perspective, and I like this a lot better because I'm off to the side, and I'm using that same angle of view. And when you have a wider angle lens and you get really close, it almost feels like you're right there. Let's flash forward to an image of a GoPro camera. It's a super wide angle view, and those are shot really, really close to the subject. So when the person's doing the crazy trick, you're like, I'm right there with them, riding that wave or jumping out of that airplane or whatever. We're not that exaggerated on our phones, but that's something we can use. If you want that sense of like, we're in that moment, we can do that. Other stories unfold for you, and it's your response or your responsibility, your joy to kind of follow the story. There's this rainbow arch. I live in Santa Barbara, and I was down there, and I was like, that's beautiful, and I just took a picture of it. And then I walked around the corner, and I was like, yes, this is great, because we have the boyfriend and girlfriend, or I don't know, maybe they're married, and we're gonna have an Instagram moment, which is she's instructing him how she wants the picture made. And I'm like, yes, I'm loving this moment. And now she's telling him. And then I get one in her power pose, and I get one, notice the purse on his elbow. And I'm just following the story. I'm like, please, you know, give it, you know, she hands him the purse. I'm like, oh yes, you know, I'm just aligning myself. And obviously with mobile phones, we shoot quietly, and so we can do these kind of things. And we're following those stories. And sometimes when we follow little threads like this, we can then turn them into projects, and that's what photographers do. I mean, the difference between a pro and an amateur typically is that they have a thread that connects their body of work. The rest of us, if I went through our camera rolls, it would just be a lot of like everything. Like you basically photographed everything at max, like someone's shoes, something cool, you know. But the people who are really good, you look at it, and think those of you who are designers, the designers who have that voice and sense of style, you look at their work and you're like, wow, that's cohesive. It's like all tied together. Like, how did you do that? And part of the way they do that is they have yeses and nos. One of my clients is Patagonia. They're an outdoor apparel company. They have a list of 10 no's. You can never have a fence in a photograph. You can never have a power line. You can never have plastic. And there's all these things. So once you go through all those no's and you get a picture, it has a Patagonia feel to it. And once you know that and you look at the pictures, you're like, oh, I get it. They're actually steering how this is taking place. So anyway, the reason I'm saying all this is, let's say with this one, for me, I'm like on a mission to photograph, to like create a set of 100 of these. I don't know what we call these, but I'm gonna call it like Instagram boyfriend or something, you know, or Instagram friend, you know, and I just think that's really interesting. I think a documentary film on these places that people travel to take pictures would be fascinating, because it's a unique time in our culture when that's happening. But that's me, that doesn't have to be you. But what I'm saying is, when you get something that you kind of like, you have to start to go with it a little further, follow the thread, right? All right, light, let's talk about that. Moving to our next topic. one of my friends he loves to sail, and he sent a picture of him sailing, and I said, oh, it looks like a beautiful day out there. He said, yes, there was no wind, so it wasn't really sailing. It was more like, how do you put it, precision drifting. I was like, that's really funny. And then when I saw these people, no wind, I was like, oh my gosh, they're just barely going. And I'm like, come on, float into that spot, float into that spot, float into that spot. And sometimes we have to do that. We have to be patient, right? And this is the light that happens a lot of times in storm weather. This is my wife's grandma's barn in Michigan. It's a stormy day. This is just 5 minutes later. There's usually clouds, and at the end of the day, the sun gets underneath the clouds. And then the way the light travels in there, bounces around, and creates a drama is always magic. So if you know it's stormy and you can tell the sun's about to dip, you're like, I'm just hanging out at this barn. Because my first barn picture is okay, but I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to wait for that. Other times your kid's at the beach and you're waiting for it, and the kids are doing stuff and you're getting it together, family trip or early morning this last summer. And again, beach. This was at noon, and this was a friend who's building a new home, really creative guy. And so my point here too is that it's not always the end of the day or the beginning of the day. Sometimes at noon, I just had to wait for the right moment of him in this construction site where the light really worked. This is again around the middle of the day at a playground in Monterey, same time of day, just one on top of a play structure, the other one inside of a play structure. And so part of what the waiting is with the light is sometimes you're waiting for the light to change. Other times, maybe in this case, I'm just waiting for, because you can't direct kids. If those of you who have kids, you can't be like, go climb in that tunnel and look at me and smile. They do the opposite, right? So you're waiting for the alignment of things. You're waiting for the right type of light to work. In this case, I'm picking up another daughter from their boating down at the beach. Our little canoe's over there, and they hopped out of the canoe and are on this wall, and my daughter said, Dad, come over here. We want a picture. And I'm like, great, because my daughters don't say that very often. Most often they say, no more pictures, Dad. And so the same time of day, this is a beautiful, I think, picture in that moment. But then here's them sitting on the wall, different kind of beautiful moment, the same kind of thing, but being aware of that, having that patience. Or sometimes there is sort of a call to arms, right? As a photographer, it's like, okay, and sometimes it's someone actually saying it. Other times maybe it's like the moment is calling you, like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And this moment's speaking to me, and I better respond. And so listening to that voice. What I found as a photographer is this. The more magnificent the moment, the more magnificent the light, the harder we have to work. Here's what this looks like for me. I love biking, so I'm biking in the hills of Santa Barbara. I get to the very top. It's about 4,000 feet high. The sun is even up. I've biked up, 4,000 vertical feet. And I'm just like on top of the world, right? Hero moment. And I see a piano way down there. And there it is. And my eye and my mind and my heart are like, yes, someone brought a piano to the top of the mountain, and I take a picture of it, but you can't see it, right? So I have to get closer. And the light's there, and I'm kind of listening, and I'm like, I have to work for this. Even though there's a piano, even though there's beautiful light, even though I'm top of the mountains, I got to work for this thing. And so then I get closer to it, and I say, well, maybe if I show it this way, whoa, it's like an old distressed piano, even better. But then I turn, and in Lightroom, I added a little spotlight right there, a little bit of a vignette, and just a touch of boost of color. But that's a picture that works, right? And the trouble is that what most of us do is we see the moment, and we kind of give up. And I know this because I've taught thousands and thousands of photography students. And what I've learned is the more magnificent the moment, the more beautiful or handsome the subject, the worse the photography from my students. And it would be like, let's just imagine your ultimate celebrity. You're out here and they walk by and you say, can I take a picture of you? It would be a horrible picture. Because you would be like, oh my God, so excited, just take a picture, I don't even care what it is, But what you would have to do if you wanted to take a good, strong portrait that could even be published in a huge major publication is say, I really respect and honor your work, and I know it could be an inconvenience, but could we walk to the window light over there? Because that's going to create something that's really strong, and maybe you could just stand in front of a white pillar, and then you're going to get like a studio quality, professional level image. You with me on that? But you have to really work for it, and asking that person, whether it's a celebrity or your dad who doesn't like to be photographed, or your kids, or whatever it is, taking that effort is always worth it. So let's go back. Capture. There are 3 things that I'm recommending here. I'm saying let's think like an artist. If you don't like my artist in inspiration, the 4 I mentioned, come up with your own artist, but say like, okay, this is going to influence me. I like how, I don't know, let's see, I like how Vampire Zombie plays music, and I'm going to let like their vibe of their music, this indie kind of rock, I'm going to let that somehow filter into how I do my mobile photography. I'm going to compose with closeness and also with story in mind, and I need to be really connected, and I need to think about what actually is the story. Because here's what happens to a lot of people. You would show me your photograph, and it'd be a picture of a boat on a lake, and I would say, great, it's a boat on a lake, and it's a beautiful boat on a beautiful lake, but what's it about? And you would, and what, not you, not of course you, but what amateur photography students say, I don't know. It's just a boat on a lake. And it's like, but it has to be about something more. There has to be story. I once watched this interview with this National Geographic documentary person interviewing someone, and she would say, give me a 1-word response to these words. And so the word was watermelon. She would say summer. Puppies, cute. Story, she said connection. I thought that's really interesting, because really if you think of any good story, any story that actually works, there is some sort of connection that happens. And so we're trying to have that connection with closeness, with proximity, and then figure out what do we want to tell. Search for the light. You got to work for it. You can't, it's not just going to give it to you. People say, go to Italy, you can't take a bad picture. Totally wrong. You can take really bad pictures. All right, well, let's do this. We're right on track with time. This is awesome, but I saw someone actually go like this and nod down. So I'm going to call you out right now. No, I'm not. But what I am going to do, I want you to give a neighbor a knuckle punch, wake them up a little bit, and just like this, and just say, neighbor, what's one thing you've learned that's been of value so far? So just one takeaway. Go for it. Neighbor, knuckle punch, one thing. Let me grab your attention again. Also, I have no problem with people falling asleep, because when you teach college, that's just part of teaching college. And sometimes you're like, they probably need to sleep, like let them go. Because Max is overwhelming. There's so much to take in. That's why I also like to do little breaks, just to kind of like, okay. Let's do a quick pause here. Any questions, any thoughts? What we could do is if you have a thought or question, you say it, I'll repeat it so other people can hear it, and then try to tackle it. Anyone have a thought or question or idea? Yeah. Yeah, let me reiterate the question. The first was a comment, I don't really try to take great pictures with my phone. And then what do you recommend in regards to settings? Should we just leave it on auto or try to do something else? And the answer is going to be leave it on auto. And that's where you want to start, because you don't want to overcomplicate too many things at once. It would be kind of like if you're going to, I don't know, let's say if you're going to learn how to ride a bike, like ride a bike around town that's a beach cruiser before you go mountain biking in the hills with bumps and where you could die if something goes wrong. You know what I mean? Because once you get tangled up in those settings, then your creativity disappears. So I find that incremental technique is the way to grow as a photographer. What people tend to do, let's just say Photoshop. Someone who tries to learn Photoshop and learn everything that exists in Photoshop usually fails. But someone who learns very tactical, very focused thing becomes very good at it. I heard this from someone who's on the Photoshop team, that if ever you apply for a job to work for the Photoshop team and you say that you're a master or you have mastery in Photoshop, you're instantly disqualified from the job because they don't believe there is such thing as mastery in Photoshop. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing, that's brilliant. And photography is just like that, right? No one like nails it and has it. And you don't have to feel bad. I mean, even on other cameras, if you put it on automatic, what you want to do is figure out how you can create well, red or blue. I don't have red, I'll use blue. Like if I didn't have a camera and I didn't know how it worked, I would just throw it on auto and I would shoot. Or if I didn't have my phone, I'd grab anyone's phone. And then incrementally build up from that. And then say, okay, well next time, the exposure was weird. The subject was underexposed. Well, yeah, go into the Lightroom mobile or the Lightroom app. You can change exposure really easily and then kind of master how do you deal with backlight. I got that one. Now how do I deal with side light or whatever it is? Yeah, but great question. Great question. Yeah, over there in the green. Yes. Yes. So the comment was, I got the new iPhone, which has the new lens, if you aren't familiar with it. It has one which is super wide, and it shows more, and I think you said you kind of love wide-angle photography, and do I have any thoughts on that process? One of the things I would say is I go to my landscape photographers, like let's go to an Ansel Adams and study his work or something. He liked wider angle lenses. And when you have wide angle lenses, so if I'm shooting a landscape and I have a rock right here, I get the camera close and low to the rock. I need a foreground element to anchor the shot. If I just hold it up like this, it's just a lot of nothing. So the wider the angle lens, the proximity becomes even more important, and also your camera angle. So if I'm photographing a person at, and this may be too techie for people, but like at a 50 millimeter focal length, I can get away shooting kind of up here or down here. But if I shoot with the ultra wide angle up here, their head's going to be so big, their feet are going to be really small. It's just odd, right? So it's much more sensitive. And so what I would think of is you're using an instrument that has this sensitivity, and it's much more exciting. You put on that wide angle lens, wow, look at all this stuff. And that tends to mean you make worse photographs. So we're going to start to see a lot of really bad photographs captured with a really wide angle lens because there's a steep learning curve. Why did they give us approximately 30 millimeter focal length lens? You kind of can't go wrong. Not too much distortion, not too close, not too far away. It's kind of an easy, nice little lens to work with. And that's why we take pictures. We're like, wow, I'm not that bad, you know? But then when you get to those extremes, that's something to consider. And it's not something to feel bad about, but to really learn from. And what people do, like let's say on a pro photographer, I don't have that camera, but you pushed it. So you take a photograph of someone at 10 feet, at 8 feet, at 5 feet, at 2 feet. You put really close to the rock, really far away to the rock, and you actually figure out where it falls apart, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, in the yellow shirt, t-shirt. Yes. 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 So the question was, we shoot a lot of corporate events, and it's stale and boring, and how do we change that up? There's no hope for you. No. But I think what I tend to do, and I don't know your exact situation, I'm just going to invent a couple. What I would do, I'm just going to go to a CEO. I know this is an event, but if I'm photographing a CEO and I need the forward-facing, strong CEO, and there she is, and kind of that powerful person, I would say, hey, and I know that's her default mode, and I'll go to the group shot. I would say, you know what, I need one shot that's really strong. I need this as the forward-facing of the company, and then I also need a second shot. I know that you have 3 kids and you're really into library and you donate volunteer a lot of your time at the library. I need one which is a little bit more soft and warm. We're going to do 2 shots, and she's like, got it. And you do shot 1, and then you do shot 2. But if I hadn't told her that, I could never get shot 2. So you set them up for it. So in that corporate thing, and think of like kids' soccer pictures, even like, we're going to do one as a team, or we're going to do a goofy one. I'm not saying you're going to do goofy, but what you're going to try to do is really direct them. And so what that means is like, hey, we just need some action shots of you guys here, and I want to look like you're interacting. So I want you right here to say a funny joke, and this is your funny joke, this is a funny joke, and I want everyone to laugh. They say, this is a funny joke, and then they all start laughing, and it's so dumb that really makes them really laugh, and you capture an authentic moment. And they say, I want you to put, kind of pretend like you're a team, and you're together, and you're connected in this moment, you're excited, or think, or something along those lines. So what I really try to do is to tell them that, and so they know that versus kind of sneak it in, because then they resent it. Especially at corporate settings, because people are trying to look their best. Maybe their job review's on the line, or maybe, I don't know what the dynamic is, but if you go in and say, hey, we need 3 things, can you guys help me? And often if you ask for help, people will. And I learned that from Steve McCurry, the famous National Geographic photographer. He photographed the Afghan girl, the most famous cover of a magazine ever. But I asked him, Steve, how do you get these connected portraits? And he said, well, I talk to people, and I say, I'm here on a project with whatever language I can, and I need to photograph something or people in your town or village or something. Could you help me? And go back and study his work, and you realize like every portrait, someone is actually giving something to him versus him taking it from them. And so that can help a lot. All right, I'm going to cut off questions. We can do more later, but I have more content. But those are good. Hopefully they're helpful to hear that stuff. And we can always talk offline too. Create and improve. This is kind of a part where we're going to look at light and color and axis and those different things and how we do all of that. So to do that, I'm going to jump to Lightroom. And inside of Lightroom here, I have a handful of photographs. And I'm going to, I can't talk. Lightroom, and there's two versions of Lightroom. Lightroom Classic, more desktop focused. We're obviously talking about phones and stuff like that. So we're in Lightroom, which is the one which is more cloud-based, which we can use on a desktop, we can use on a tablet, and we can use on our phone. And whatever change we make shows up in all three places as long as we're connected to the internet in some way. Does that make sense? And we probably already know all that. But it's helpful to say that. So maybe I should jump actually to my iPad before we do that. And it doesn't look that different. But what I wanted to highlight here, we heard how they released all these tutorials, and I had a chance to make a bunch of them. And so if there's stuff that we cover in here, you'll find it in these tutorials. And what you can do is there's different types of tutorials. Some where you can kind of click through and it looks like it's loading right now. You can click through and watch the steps. And kind of see like, okay, how is this image made? And you can also go in and do that. So it will kind of give you a guide, like here's how you might move that slider. And you can always press and hold and kind of see the before and after. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I do kind of want to highlight that. You know, I have, I think, 50 tutorials if you just go to your home screen in Lightroom. And then I have 100 discovery files. Discovery files are things that I've edited, and it just plays along, and you can kind of scroll back and forth and see how that works. And the reason why I want to highlight that is I do think it's pretty cool how Adobe's working to bring tutorials inside of our app experience. Oh, it looks like I have to either finish or cancel out of that. I'm going to give it a smiley face. I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do, but I wonder if I could keep doing that. Maybe I'll get really high reviews. I could because they don't know any different. And then let me just show you discovery files real quick. And then let me just go into one here. Well, we can see some of these guys. And just to kind of show you the difference of what these are, and it shows you kind of the capture, and then it goes through it and how that image is then created. And what you can do is sort of scroll through the edits like this. And so it's more of a kind of follow along or watch type of experience. And there's a lot of great stuff on there from a lot of different people, but mine are the best. No, I'm just, no, that's horrible. And so here, I guess I'll sit down. Hopefully I can see some of you over on that side just so I can work on the iPad for a second. What we can do in this case is we can go into a folder of images. Let me just start off maybe with a fix thing. And in this case, I'm tapping in what's called an album. And an album is one of the ways you can organize images. We can do the gesture thing like we've been able to do before. And we have tools which allow us to heal and change different elements in the picture. So I'm just painting over the object. In this case, the feather was so high that it kind of bled into the edges. Can you guys see that? So I kind of decreased the feather, and then that helps to improve that. In this case, we remove that little tree so that that's gone from the image. I also brighten that photograph up. But one of the things that you can do is, or what I'll do sometimes, is those little movements can be sometimes too hard to do on the phone. Have you ever tried that? Because you're like, we can switch to a different device to hit those. And let me do a couple more fixes and just talk about how we might do that. Here's one I could do on my phone. I just don't happen to have it plugged in. Again, that's using a tool like the healing tool, clicking over it. And this one's kind of interesting because it's grabbing a source which isn't the same kind of light, and it's cloning it. So up here we can change that to heal, and that blends. And then just to give you a sense, if we change from clone, it's a direct one-to-one. Healing, it's kind of trying to blend and bleed that in together. So that's typically what we would want when we're doing kind of cleanup or retouching work like that. We'll do one more little one. We'll do a couple of things on this picture. Again, zooming in. And what I'm going to do here is just hit some different techniques. I'm getting rid of, in this photo while I'm waiting for my kids at the fair, and I am just cleaning up these little buildings on the edge. And the reason why I need to do that is because when there's things on the edge like that, the eye goes there. And you almost want to think of it like having a wool sweater on and walking through a forest or something, and it gets snagged on the branches. So the eyes will always get snagged around edges. They go to areas of focus, areas of brightness, and they want a clean edge. Those of you who are graphic designers know how important edges are, right? So you're never sloppy and unintentional about that. Then with this one, if I wanted to crop it, we can select the crop tool by tapping on that, and then I'm just going to come in to the image because it was the balance of the photograph was a little bit off. And when we crop, as you know, we have the ability to do a freeform crop, or we could do a specific aspect ratio if we wanted to as well, and have it in that way. All right, let me jump through a couple other things here. And really the intent here is just to give you a handful of ideas on how you might start to modify some photographs. We'll go to Elsie and her toast. Come on, I mean, how cute is she? And with this one, I'll actually go through a little bit more of a workflow. I'm going to bring up shadows, bring a little light, bring a little contrast, and you can press and hold. That gives us our before and after. I also need color, and with color, I'm bringing up a little bit of warmth here, and it looks a lot different over there than it does here, so we'll just kind of roll with that. There it looks really, at least to me, over too bright and too saturated, but who cares? But hopefully you can see some of those changes. And I also want to do this to highlight how one of the things that, that I've done here is I've changed a little bit of the way that I'm working with panels. And I'm going to jump back to this computer because it's easier for me to stand and see you as I'm doing this. And as you'll see, it's going to be the same folders, the same images, and the same things here. So let's do this in this case. And I wanted to highlight something related to panels. So I have this color panel, and I'm just warming that up. And if you click on these three little dots, you'll notice highlighted in blue, it says single panel mode. And that's something I recommend that you turn on. Otherwise, what happens is it's almost like your dresser drawer. When you have all the drawers open, the dresser tips over. But this says only one drawer can be open at once. And so as I went down to color, did you notice how it closed light? So there's three little dots, just kind of throwing in an expert tip. Single panel mode is a nice way to have a little more access to it. Now another thing that we can do here is we can add a little bit of light, and we'll talk about this in a few different ways. But I can go in, let me just reset these, double-clicking the sliders to reset them. I can have this source of light that's right here that has a certain amount of feather. Let me make it look bad for a moment. You can see it's a really defined edge. The more feather, the softer. So if ever you're bringing light in. And the reason why this technique is so important is usually with natural light, you don't have an external light like directing light to a face or highlighting whatever's important. So by using this method where we can say, hey, let's do a little bit of brightening there, maybe keep our highlights down. Let me try to look at what I'm seeing over there. I can't really tell too much, and then I can tap the backslash key, and you can kind of see how we're brightening it up and bringing more light into that area. Does that make sense? And what I want you to start to think about as whatever device you're on is really think about, when you look at studio lights and you see there is a light source, where is that light source typically pointed? If it's people, it's toward the face. Or if there's something that's too bright in some area, they kind of flag it and block light out from that. Does that make sense? So we look at how we can kind of burn or dodge different elements. We'll look at another example to kind of show you this in more practical ways. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and just create a shape over this here. Let me just do this 1 second. Oops, delete that. Clicked too many times. So I have this little, this radial adjustment that I've brought out on top of this. And what we can do is invert that for a moment and just to kind of exaggerate. So what I have now is I have it getting dark everywhere, I can define my feathering effect. I'm not saying this looks good, but I'm trying to kind of highlight how we can identify where an area is affecting. Sometimes if you do something in an exaggerated way, it can help you see what you have. Now I'll go back and invert it. I don't want dark, but what I do want is I want a lot of contrast, I want a lot of clarity, I want a lot of color saturation, and maybe I want some warmth. And again, this might be a little over the top on your screen, but can you kind of see how I'm bringing that into that area? I think it's about 50% too strong, but for demo purposes, I'm illuminating a part of the image. Okay, so let's go a little bit more subtle. What do we illuminate in this image? In this case, adjustment brush, and what I'm going to do with this adjustment brush, I'm double clicking these sliders, I'll just reset them, and maybe grab some exposure and go down. Let's see my brush size a little bit there, and I'm just going to paint over my little path here a couple times, and I'm not being too precise, but I'm getting a little bit in there. Let's just leave it at that. You can kind of see how I'm saying, you know what, this image, the feeling of this image for me is, this is out in the desert in California, I just want like going down that road. So I'm bringing light into that area, and this time I'm painting it with a brush. Other times we might use that radial, or we could use a gradient across an area as well. All right, let me jump to a couple more tips and tricks for you guys. This image is overexposed. One of the things you'll encounter in the controls which allow you to fix an image is an auto button. I find it tends to work best with overexposure. It didn't do quite enough for me because that shirt was so bright and the image was overexposed kind of so much. So I'm going to try to even darken that a little bit more. And then we have the color issue, so I'll go in and I'm just going to drag my color slider to bring back warmth. And again, what we can do before and after, if you're on your computer, you can't push on the screen for the before and after, that's a backslash, and that's the key which shows you that before and the after. And let's jump to color. We did a little bit with light, and I want to do a little bit with color. So you obviously can tell the story I'm trying to tell. I'm exposing, like your exposure question, you know, this time I'm customizing my exposure, so I have that. And I have the ability to say, well, with my shadows, I could bring more light into that so I could see her, or I could black that completely out, which is what I want to do. And this image, to me, is really about that silhouette, but the trouble is there isn't enough color in it. So we can add color just by cooling things off and adding a little bit, you know, our color temperature. We can also go into specific colors, or we can add color effects here. I'm going into the area where I have split toning, and I can add a highlight color if I wanted to. Don't think that really looks very good, so I'll leave that off. I could also add a shadow color, so if I wanted a little more blue in those shadows. And sometimes when you do something like that, it all of a sudden creates a fully different feel, right, with your images. And so with these kind of things that I'm showing you, I'm basically kind of hopping and skipping between a few different ways that you might use the tool. But what I'm trying to highlight is that it's sort of that intuitive, intrinsic feeling of where you want to go with it. And sometimes what you do, at least for me, when I'm using Lightroom in this way, is I'm not over-processing the image, right? Like it's like I did a little brightening, I did a little contrast, and that's it. I think what tends to happen is that we tend to think that we need to go and do maybe more than is necessary, but just letting the image be often is the best way to go. All right, well, one thing that we haven't really talked about is access and share, and I'm just going to type in Hanalei because we were in Kauai this summer, and we'll see, you know, there's all these pictures from family trip. And there's my little Elsie feeding a pig on the side of the road. And I want to change the image. So I tap the C key to go to the crop tool. And I also am trying to highlight that you can access photos by just typing in words that are associated with them. I could type in the word ladder, and I would see all the photographs I've taken with a ladder in it. And so that's that whole Sensei magic that's built in here. And so once we do that, in this case cropping in the pig that was on the other side, I probably think that's really all this image needs. It doesn't need a lot, especially up there. Maybe just a little boost in the shadows, maybe just a little fun contrast or something like that, and we're done. And if we're ready to share an image, there's an icon in the upper right-hand corner, and this is, you'll find, has new features. It's a ton better than it was before, which I'm so excited about with the drop that came out today. And what we can do is choose export options, so we can export images out in specific size with specific JPEG compression settings. And we can also do the share and invite. What the share and invite looks like is, if we have a folder of images, and I did this right before just so it would go quicker, I selected all of these, and I went to the option which allowed me to share and invite. It's grayed out because I already did that. And what that does is it then creates an online gallery, which is right here, of all of those photographs, so that you could then send a link to that gallery of images. You could do this with a single photograph as well. Or you can just do share, and it will create a link, and then they can just click on the link and view that particular image. So you can do galleries, you can do images, you could export it out, and then integrate it into social media. One other thing I want to cover here, and that is in my finish and share area. Actually, let's do two more things. With this one, we saw kind of the light with the globe. We can also do that same thing in other areas of the image that we want to draw the viewer into. So here, what I'm looking to do is to try to figure out, is there some way that I can add a little bit of visual interest into the eye and just brighten that up in this way. Maybe we do something like that. And then if you hover over that, you can actually right-click or control-click it in any version of Lightroom and choose Duplicate, and then bring another light source over. Now that's very convenient when it comes to eyes, but think about whenever you're using something or adding light somewhere, if you have trying to light up this side of the image, right-click it, choose Duplicate, and then bring it over somewhere else, change the shape to cover that other part of the image. And tap the H key, it hides those odd overlays that we can see there. All right, last image and then a few more thoughts. In this image, I tap the C key to go to the crop tool, and I want to share this on Instagram as a story. And I know the aspect ratio is 16:9. So I'm going to 16:9 inside of Lightroom. And the reason why I want to do that is I kind of want to have control before it gets to Instagram, if you know what I mean, and the story just kind of resized, and you're like, what happened to, what's going on? And so I have that control here with how that looks. And then also while I'm here, before I post that image, I'm doing a little bit of my basic workflow, which in this case is some light work and maybe a little bit of clarity, and that's a wrap, right? So keeping it really simple. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of emphasizing the simplicity of this is what I've tend to find, and obviously we all have our own style and taste, is that the kind of the best case use for these tools is that light, bright, easy, quick, here I am, here I go type of a workflow. If ever you feel like you're getting lost in that workflow, that's where I jump to a different computer, or that's where I jump to Photoshop and do something else along those lines. All right, well, there's a quick kind of preview of some of the things we can do in Lightroom. Back to my little deck over here, and a recap. Some takeaways. How do we create better images? One, I think we start to think about artistry. And even now, if you're taking a picture of the notes, like, well, what is the artistic photograph of this? Is there an artistic photograph of this? What am I doing? Something caught my eye. I want to remember this. Why do I want to remember this? And then, is there some way to frame? Is there some way to get closer? Is there some way to compose for connection and story? And then as we're out in the world and light is happening, do I need to be patient for it? Do I need to be predictive for the light? How do I really search for that? Remember that idea about Van Gogh that he said, I won't take it back, because being an artist is searching and never finding it in full. It's that search, you're just looking and digging. And then finally we jumped over to Lightroom quickly and just said, hey, this is a tool we can use really easily to enhance light, color, and what I mean by clarity isn't the clarity slider, but it's like the clarity of the image, of what it's about. Because what I find is 90% of my images aren't good enough in capture. They need that extra little touch to get them to where they need that to be. So that's adding the clarity of your vision to it. And then, of course, a huge thank you, and I'll have a couple more slides, but if you want my info or my website, you can contact me through that, or Instagram, follow along. That would be super fun. I love talking about photography, so I'd be happy to do that. My book's coming out, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can check that out. And don't forget to take your session survey, but we have a few minutes, so I'm going to say a big thank you. If you want to stay and chat, I would be welcome to that. But thank you so much for coming today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.